inside to the final Campaign 2020 podcast before the general election. I'm George Gerbo. We are just days away from determining who will win the race for the White House, as well as control of the House and the Senate. We'll break down all of that for you coming up. A reminder that you can find the Campaign 2020 podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Just search Washington Times in your favorite podcast app. And also follow the talented work of our campaign and politics team at washingtontimes.com/elections. And joining me to break down these final moments as we wind down what has been a long, strange trip it's been, I guess you could say, in this campaign season are Washington Times national politics reporter Seth McLaughlin back with us once again. Seth, how are you?
I'm well, George. Days away could be optimistic, but
that's just fair. It's a fair, yeah. Sorry for putting an end date on the voting proceedings. And also joining us for a repeat appearance is Washington Times White House correspondent Dave Boyer. Dave, welcome back as well.
Hi, George. Thanks.
So, just in this, big picture, we've come down here to as we wind down the end, whenever the end will be. Of course, we recall 2000 when it took until December 13th for a determination on George Bush beating Al Gore in that election. This time around, it's a campaign like no other, where we've eschewed the traditional ways of campaigning in a lot of cases. There hasn't been an indoor rally since President Trump's won back in June. He's undertaken a lot of them outdoors now. The Biden campaign is doing these drive-in gatherings and people honking their horns and waving flags. And all of that kind of obscures the fact that the conventions were unlike any other. Oh, by the way, only the fourth impeachment proceeding brought against an American president in the history of the republic happened in January, which feels like it might have been 4 years ago at this point. And I guess I'll start with you, Dave. It's been just some things that we thought were kind of going to dictate play. Of course, a lot of that's been upended by the coronavirus, but it's still kind of played out even though, okay, we're ready for some disruptions and some changes here, the candidates have tried to the best of their abilities and have leaned into trying to make it as normal of a campaign as possible, given the circumstances.
Yeah, you're right, George. I've been thinking back today. I've been involved in 5 presidential campaigns since 1992, to varying degrees. And I mean, there's just nothing like this year and nothing that could have prepared us for how this year has played out with COVID. You mentioned impeachment. In any ordinary presidential year, when an incumbent president is impeached in his election year, in his re-election year, that's all you would hear about. In this year, you hardly hear about it at all, except when Trump himself brings it up, because he feels he was persecuted. And so that gives you an idea of how strange and unprecedented this year has been.
And Seth, we go back, I was kind of going back through, some of the episodes and just kind of looking how far we've come here with this. And we started with you in Iowa and then in New Hampshire and Wisconsin. You've been all over essentially the Midwest. And we're a long way from Iowa at this point, and you're almost a long way from the kind of the traditional, getting out on the road and interacting with voters as much as you used to as well. So it's probably been a different experience seeing this from maybe a little bit further away than you typically would during a campaign season.
I mean, Iowa feels like it was 10 years ago. And yeah, it's been a weird one to cover. Because again, if you go back to January, you're running around Iowa, you're talking to voters on the ground, you're getting kind of a solid sense of how people's messages are resonating. And it's just a little bit tougher in this environment. I was just in the Midwest, and people, because of the coronavirus, then on top of that, just because of the polarized nature of politics right now, people just they're not as apt to open up, it seems. So that has been a defining characteristic in the limited interactions I've had in recent months. But I'd say, just picking up on what Dave said, the most interesting thing with this, and it's kind of the most interesting thing about this last 4 years, is just what a gigantic presence Donald Trump has. So much so that if you're looking for interesting things since the conventions is the lack of activity from Joe Biden, where it's, he's picked it up recently, but it seems like his strategy is basically cede the playing field to Trump, which is something no candidate really wants to do in any race, but he's doing it because he thinks the more attention for Trump, the better. It's just, that is unique in and of itself, just, opening up things for your rival.
And I think that's a good transition, Dave, into, what's kind of surprised us in this cycle. And Seth hits on mine in the fact that you see that the Biden campaign has now kind of picked up the activity, let's call it, in the last couple of weeks, and read stories, after the conventions in a few weeks. And again, understanding the concerns and considerations given to the coronavirus, that both of them are in their 70s, and obviously the president contracted it, but that Biden, from the outset after that campaign, he did a rally here outside of Pittsburgh, former mill site that's now turned into kind of a tech thing that Carnegie Mellon University operates. And it was, he's got the podium and the stage up there, but it's just maybe 7 reporters inside. And then there's a handful of Biden, actual supporters outside who would have liked to get in and stand separate and everything and just be there a part of it. And I think there's some missteps there. And it was surprising for me to see the Biden campaign get late into, listen, you're going to have to meet people somehow, whether it's being far away from them, but you're going to have to you can't just do, and as Seth, as we've talked about before, the basement strategy, they almost lingered. It was fine to do that up until the convention, but I think the convention should have marked an opportunity for them to get out in whatever the safest manner possible, Dave, and get out and interact with voters in some form or fashion, and it really hasn't happened until the last few weeks for Biden.
Yeah, that to me has been the biggest single surprise of this campaign. Something that George W. Bush said during his 2000 campaign that's always stayed with me. He used to talk about his very first race in Texas when he was running for a House seat in Congress and he lost. And he was trying to figure out what he did wrong after he lost, and he ran into a voter and they told him, I didn't vote for you. And he said, well, why not? And the person said, you didn't ask for my vote. And ever since then, Bush said, especially when he was running for president, every single rally he did, he would say, I'm here asking, in his Texas way, he would say, I'm here asking for your vote. And basically, Joe Biden is not doing that, has not done that this year. He's stayed at home, and you can call it prudence, you can call it, wanting to avoid tough questions from the press, whatever. He has not been out interacting face-to-face with voters until very recently, and putting himself out there. And it's kind of a vulnerable thing that candidates do, and they put themselves out there and they say, please vote for me. But Joe Biden just has, turned this practice on its head and just thinks that he's going to be able to win this race almost purely on the amount of hatred out there for Donald Trump. And I know I'm coming at this from a traditional retail politics standpoint, and maybe Biden is right this year because this year is unlike any other year, but I just don't see it happening that way.
Not only that, just to jump in, that strategy has been, I don't know if compound is the right word, but the Biden team, when the coronavirus hit, they basically pulled the whole team off the field. And then in the Trump team and Republicans did it for a while, but, once they get comfortable, they put everyone back out to register voters and all that. And the Biden team really, let them run wild, have free reign for quite a while. And, I think that's something if Biden ends up losing, not only him having a limited, visibility on the campaign trail, limited interactions with voters like Boyer's talking about, but also just the ground mechanics of it all, giving that up is, it's in a traditional sense, it's rolling the dice.
No, and it gives me, kind of heartens me a little bit to hear that Americans still like to be catered to in this way, because we've just gone through, I mean, we consume it and report it and dissect it as journalists, but it's a lot of just, there's so much content to consume. Okay, Biden did a digital thing, Trump did this thing, Twitter, YouTube videos. I was on Instagram, and it was a promoted ad from Jill Biden, and she's talking to people